The sound of poker chips clinking against whiskey glasses filled the smoky air of the Golden Dust Saloon in Bozeman, Montana Territory, on a sweltering August night in 1883. And Clara Sutherland knew her father had just gambled away something far more valuable than the deed to their struggling ranch. She stood frozen in the doorway, her pale green dress dusty from the long ride into town, watching as her father's trembling hands fumbled with his final cards. The men around the table leaned forward with predatory interest, their faces illuminated by the flickering oil lamps overhead. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs as she recognized the desperation in her father's bloodshot eyes, the same look he'd worn for months since her mother died of consumption last winter. "I haven't got the money, Porter," her father said, his voice cracking like dried leather. "But I can make good on this debt. I swear it." The man across from him, a barrel-chested gambler named Marcus Porter, stroked his thick mustache and leaned back in his chair. His cold gray eyes swept across the room before landing on Clara. A smile that made her stomach turn spread across his weathered face. "Well now, Walter," Porter said slowly, deliberately. "You owe me $3,000. That's not pocket change, and I don't take promises from desperate men, but perhaps we can arrange something else." Clara felt the weight of every eye in the saloon turn toward her. She wanted to run, to flee back to the ranch and pretend this nightmare wasn't happening, but her feet remained rooted to the sawdust-covered floor. Her father wouldn't meet her gaze, shame bowing his shoulders forward. "My daughter," her father whispered, the words barely audible above the tinny piano music. "I could sign over guardianship. She's 20 years old, healthy, can cook and clean. She'd make someone a fine wife." The room erupted in murmurs and low whistles. Clara's vision swam, tears burning behind her eyes. Her own father was offering her up like livestock to settle a gambling debt. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife could. Porter stood from the table, circling it like a vulture eyeing carrion. He approached Clara, looking her up and down with an appraising stare that made her skin crawl. She lifted her chin, refusing to show weakness even as her world crumbled around her. "She's pretty enough," Porter said. "Got spirit in those eyes. Yeah, Walter, I'll accept this trade. Draw up the papers." The saloon owner, a thin man with spectacles, hurried to fetch pen and paper. Clara finally found her voice, though it came out hoarse and strained. "Papa, please, don't do this. We can figure something else out. We can sell the cattle, the horses, anything." Walter Sutherland finally looked at his daughter, and the broken man she saw bore little resemblance to the strong rancher who had once carried her on his shoulders. "There's nothing left to sell, Clara. The ranch is mortgaged to the hilt. This is the only way. The only way." Clara's voice rose, drawing more attention. "You're selling your own daughter. Mama would be ashamed of you." The words hit their mark. Her father flinched as if she'd struck him, but he didn't change course. Within minutes, the papers were drawn up, signed and witnessed by half a dozen men who would remember this night in the Golden Dust Saloon. Clara stood rigid as Porter reached for the documents, folding them carefully into his jacket pocket. "Come along then, girl," Porter said, gripping her arm roughly. "You're my property now." Before Clara could protest, the saloon doors swung open with a bang that silenced the entire room. A tall man entered, his broad shoulders filling the doorway. He wore a dusty brown duster coat over worn denim, and a black Stetson hat shadowed his face. Spurs jingled softly as he walked, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. Everything about him spoke of hard miles and harder years. "Heard there was a poker game," the stranger said, his voice deep and steady. He pushed his hat back, revealing sharp features tanned by years under the sun, a strong jaw, and eyes so dark they appeared almost black in the lamplight. A scar ran along his left cheekbone, giving him a dangerous edge. Clara guessed he was somewhere near 28 or 30. Porter's grip on Clara's arm tightened. "Game's over, friend. Move along." The stranger's gaze swept the room, pausing on Clara and the tears streaking down her face, then moving to her father's guilt-ridden expression, and finally settling on Porter's possessive hold. "Doesn't look over to me," the stranger said quietly. "Looks like something interesting just happened." One of the other gamblers, emboldened by whiskey, spoke up. "Walter here just traded his daughter to settle his debt to Porter, fair and square." The stranger's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He moved further into the room, and Clara noticed the well-worn Colt .45 holstered at his hip. This was a man who knew how to handle himself, that much was clear. "That right?" he asked, directing the question to Porter. "You taking women as payment for gambling debts now?" Porter bristled. "It's legal. All documented and witnessed. None of your concern, stranger." "Name's Daniel Ramsey," the man said, removing his hat and setting it on the bar. "And I'm making it my concern. How much was the debt?" "3,000, Porter replied suspiciously. "Why?" Daniel reached into his coat and pulled out a thick leather wallet. Clara watched in astonishment as he counted out bills onto the nearest table, each one crisp and clean. $3,000 was more money than she'd seen in her entire life. "There's your 3,000, Daniel said. "Now hand over those papers." Porter's face flushed red. "Wait just a minute." "What's your game here?" "No game. You've been paid. Give me the papers." The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Several men's hands drifted toward their weapons, but Daniel stood calm and collected, his posture relaxed yet ready. Clara held her breath, torn between hope and confusion. Who was this stranger, and why was he interfering? Porter's eyes narrowed. "Even if I give you the papers, she's still bound by them. You'd just be taking my place." "That's my business. Papers. Now." Something in Daniel's tone made it clear this wasn't a request. Porter muttered a curse under his breath, but retrieved the documents from his jacket. He slapped them into Daniel's outstretched hand, grabbed the money from the table, and shoved it into his pockets. "You're a fool, Ramsey," Porter said. "That girl's nothing but trouble waiting to happen." Daniel didn't respond. He unfolded the papers, reading through them carefully while the entire saloon watched. Clara studied his face, trying to understand what he was thinking, what he planned to do with her. Her fate had been transferred from one stranger to another, and she still had no control over her own life. After what felt like an eternity, Daniel looked up at her. Their eyes met, and Clara saw something unexpected there. Kindness, mixed with a deep sadness that spoke of his own past wounds. "Miss Sutherland," he said formally, "these papers say you're bound to serve whoever holds them, correct?" "Yes," she whispered, her throat tight. "And you had no say in this arrangement, none." Daniel nodded slowly, then did something that shocked everyone in the saloon. He took the papers, held them up for all to see, and methodically tore them in half. Then he tore them again and again until nothing remained but scraps that fluttered to the floor like snow. "You're free," he said simply. "No one owns you. Go wherever you want to go." Clara stared at him, unable to process what had just happened. Freedom, just like that, after he'd spent $3,000. "I don't understand," she managed to say. "Why would you do that?" Daniel's expression grew distant. "Let's just say I know what it's like to be trapped by circumstances beyond your control. Nobody should be traded like property." Porter exploded from his chair. "You destroyed legal documents. That money was payment for those papers, and you destroyed them. This is fraud." "The money was payment for her freedom," Daniel corrected coldly. "And she's free. Anyone have a problem with that?" His hand rested near his holster, not quite touching it but close enough to send a clear message. The other men in the saloon shifted uncomfortably. A few looked away. Porter's face cycled through several shades of red before he finally stomped toward the door. "This isn't over, Ramsey," he threatened. "You've made an enemy tonight." "Add you to the list," Daniel said without concern. After Porter left, the saloon gradually returned to its previous noise level, though conversations buzzed with speculation about what they'd witnessed. Daniel turned back to Clara, his expression softening. "You've got family, somewhere safe to go." Clara glanced at her father, who hadn't moved from his seat at the poker table. He looked like a ghost of himself, hollow and broken. The sight of him filled her with a complicated mixture of anger, pity, and heartbreak. "Not anymore," she said quietly. Daniel followed her gaze and seemed to understand the situation completely. He retrieved his hat from the bar and gestured toward the door. "I've got a room at the boarding house down the street. Mrs. Henderson runs it, decent woman. I'll pay for a room for you tonight, give you time to figure out what you want to do next." "I can't accept more charity from you," Clara protested, even as exhaustion washed over her. "You've already spent so much. It's not charity. It's the right thing to do." He paused, studying her face. "When's the last time you ate?" Clara's stomach chose that moment to growl loudly, answering the question. She couldn't actually remember her last proper meal. The past few days had been a blur of worry about her father's disappearances and the mounting debts. A ghost of a smile crossed Daniel's face. "Come on. We'll get you some food first, then a room." Too tired and overwhelmed to argue further, Clara followed Daniel out of the Golden Dust Saloon. The cool night air felt refreshing after the stifling smokiness inside. Above them, stars scattered across the vast Montana sky, indifferent to the dramas playing out below. They walked in silence down the dusty main street of Bozeman. The town was small but growing, fueled by the nearby gold strikes and the railroad that had arrived a few years earlier. Clara had been born in a small cabin 15 miles outside of town, and though she'd visited Bozeman many times, tonight it felt foreign and strange. Daniel led her to a small restaurant that was still open, run by a Chinese family. The owner, Mr. Chen, greeted Daniel like an old friend, which told Clara that Daniel had been in town for at least a little while. They sat at a corner table, and Daniel ordered beef stew and fresh bread for both of them. "You're not going to ask me to explain my family situation?" Clara asked, breaking the silence. Daniel shook his head. "Not my business unless you want to share it, but you just spent $3,000 on a complete stranger." "I had the money. You needed help. Sometimes it's that simple." Clara studied him across the table. In the better lighting of the restaurant, she could see more details. His hands were calloused and scarred, working hands that had seen hard labor. The lines around his eyes suggested he smiled more than his current serious expression indicated. He was handsome in a rugged, weathered way that spoke of a life lived outdoors. "Nothing's that simple," Clara said. "Everyone wants something." "Fair enough," Daniel acknowledged. "I wanted to stop something wrong from happening. Mission accomplished." The food arrived, steaming and fragrant. Clara's hands trembled as she picked up her spoon, and she realized she was on the verge of breaking down. The emotions of the night crashed over her all at once: betrayal, fear, confusion, and a strange kind of relief. "My mother died last winter," she found herself saying, needing to fill the silence with something other than her own thoughts. Consumption took her slowly. "My father, he couldn't handle it. Started drinking, started gambling. I tried to keep the ranch going by myself, but it was too much. I knew things were bad, but I didn't know how bad until tonight." Daniel listened without interrupting, his dark eyes focused on her with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable but somehow wasn't. "I keep thinking I should hate him," Clara continued. "My own father tried to trade me to settle a debt, But mostly I just feel sad. Sad for him, for what we lost, for who he used to be. Grief changes people, Daniel said quietly. Sometimes they find their way back, sometimes they don't. You sound like you know from experience. Daniel was quiet for a long moment, then nodded. Lost my whole family when I was younger. Fire took our ranch in Texas. I was away working another spread, came back to find everything gone. My parents, my little sister, all of it. I spent a long time being angry at the world, at myself for not being there. Did some things I'm not proud of. I'm sorry, Clara said, and she meant it. The weight of his loss was evident in every word. It was 10 years ago now. I've learned to carry it differently. But I swore that, if I ever had the chance to help someone in trouble, I would. Tonight, I had that chance. They finished their meal in a more comfortable silence. Clara felt some of the tension leave her shoulders as warm food filled her stomach. When they were done, Daniel paid the bill and led her to the boarding house 3 buildings down. Mrs. Henderson was a plump woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She took one look at Clara's tear-stained face and exhausted posture, and immediately ushered her upstairs to a clean, simple room with a real bed, fresh linens, and a wash basin. "You need anything, dear, you just call out," Mrs. Henderson said. "I'll bring up some hot water for washing and a nightgown you can borrow." After the landlady left, Clara sank onto the bed and finally let herself cry. She cried for her mother, for the father she'd lost even though he still lived, for the home she could never return to, and for the uncertain future stretching before her. But underneath the grief was something else, something small but growing: hope. A stranger named Daniel Ramsey had given her back her freedom without asking for anything in return. In a world that had suddenly revealed itself to be far crueler than she'd imagined, his kindness shone like a beacon. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for tonight, she was safe, fed, and free. That was enough. Clara woke to sunlight streaming through the thin curtains of her room. For a moment disoriented, she didn't remember where she was. Then the events of the previous night came flooding back, and she sat up quickly, her heart racing. She was free. Daniel Ramsey had torn up the papers. But what now? Clara washed her face in the basin, braided her long brown hair, and put on the same dusty dress from the night before. It was the only one she had. Everything else was back at the ranch, and she had no desire to return there to face her father or salvage belongings from a life that was over. A soft knock at the door made her jump. "Miss Sutherland," Mrs. Henderson's voice called. "Breakfast is ready downstairs if you're hungry. And Mr. Ramsey asked me to let you know he'll be at the general store this morning if you need anything." Clara opened the door. "Thank you, Mrs. Henderson. I'll be right down." The boarding house dining room held 3 other guests, all men who barely glanced at Clara as she entered. Mrs. Henderson served her eggs, bacon, and coffee, refusing payment when Clara tried to offer the few coins she had in her pocket. "Mr. Ramsey covered your room and board for the week," the landlady explained. "Said you were to have whatever you needed." "A week?" Clara felt overwhelmed again by this stranger's generosity. "That's what the man said, paid in full cash money." Mrs. Henderson lowered her voice. "He's a good one, that Daniel Ramsey. Been staying here off and on for about 2 months. Works hard, keeps to himself mostly, but always respectful and kind. Whatever happened last night, you can trust him." Clara absorbed this information while she ate. 2 months in Bozeman meant Daniel wasn't just passing through. He had reasons to be here, a life of his own that she knew nothing about. After breakfast, she made her way to the general store, drawn by curiosity and the need to thank him properly in the light of day. The store was busy with morning shoppers, mostly women selecting fabric, foodstuffs, and household goods. Clara found Daniel near the back, examining saddles and tack with the store owner, a gray-haired man named Mr. Yates. "Miss Sutherland," Daniel said, spotting her. He seemed genuinely pleased to see her. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in weeks," Clara admitted. "Mr. Ramsey, I need to thank you again for everything you've done, and I need to ask why. I still don't understand it." Daniel glanced at Mr. Yates, who took the hint and moved away to help other customers. When they were relatively alone, Daniel spoke quietly. "I told you the truth last night. I had the money and you needed help, but there's more to it than that." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "When I was younger, after I lost my family, I fell in with a rough crowd. We did a lot of things that crossed the line. One night, we came across a situation similar to yours. A man had traded his son to pay off a debt to a railroad boss. The boy was only 16. My associates at the time, they just laughed about it, said it wasn't our problem." Daniel's jaw tightened. "I did nothing. I stood there and watched them take that boy away to work on the railroad, probably worked to death within a year. I was too much of a coward to stand up to the others, and that cowardice has haunted me ever since. When I saw you last night, saw your father making that same kind of devil's bargain, I knew I had a chance to make a different choice. So I did." Clara felt tears prick her eyes again, but these were different than last night's tears. "You've spent the past 10 years carrying guilt for something you couldn't control. I could have done something. I didn't. But I can do something now, going forward, starting with you." "What will you do now?" Clara asked. "You've spent so much money. Will you leave Bozeman?" "I've got work here for a while yet," Daniel said. "I've been hired to help with a big cattle drive coming up next month. There's a rancher north of here, David Carmichael, who's putting together a crew to move 1,000 head to the rail station in Billings. Good pay, honest work. After that, I don't know. Probably move on to the next job." "You're a cowboy then," Clara said, "among other things." "I've done ranch work, been a trail boss, worked as a guard on wagon trains. Whatever pays and keeps me moving." He looked at her carefully. "What about you? What will you do?" That was the question Clara had been avoiding all morning. She had no family to return to, no home, no prospects. She had a week's lodging paid for and a few dollars to her name. After that, nothing. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I can cook and clean. Maybe I can find work as a domestic servant somewhere." "Can you ride?" Daniel asked. "Yes, grew up on a ranch, remember." "I can rope cattle too, and I know how to doctor sick animals." Daniel's expression grew thoughtful. "Carmichael's wife died a few years back. He's raising 2 young daughters on his own while trying to run a big operation. Last I heard, he was desperate for someone to help with the household and the girls. It's not glamorous work, but it's honest, and he's a fair man." Hope flickered in Clara's chest. "Do you think he'd consider hiring me?" "I can ride out there today and ask him," Daniel offered. "The ranch is about an hour north. If he agrees, I'll come back and get you tomorrow, bring you out to meet him and the girls." "You do that for me." Clara felt overwhelmed again by his kindness. "It's just a ride, not another $3,000, Daniel said with a slight smile. "Besides, Carmichael needs help and you need work. Makes sense to put you two together." Clara impulsively reached out and touched his arm. "Thank you, Daniel, for everything. I don't know how I'll ever repay you." His hand covered hers briefly, the touch sending an unexpected warmth through her. "No repayment necessary. Just build yourself a good life, Clara. That'll be thanks enough." He left the store shortly after, mounting a sturdy bay horse tied outside and riding north out of town. Clara spent the rest of the day helping Mrs. Henderson around the boarding house, grateful for something to occupy her mind and hands. She scrubbed floors, changed linens, and prepared vegetables for dinner, throwing herself into the work. That evening, as she was helping serve dinner to the boarders, the saloon doors of her mind opened to thoughts she'd been avoiding. Her father was still in Bozeman somewhere. Should she try to see him, say goodbye, or was it better to let that chapter close completely? She was still wrestling with the question when Daniel returned the next morning with good news. Carmichael was indeed desperate for help and willing to hire Clara sight unseen based on Daniel's recommendation. They would ride out to the ranch that afternoon. Clara borrowed a split riding skirt from Mrs. Henderson and braided her hair tightly for the journey. Daniel had brought a gentle mare for her to ride, a pretty sorrel with a white blaze. As they left Bozeman behind, Clara felt a strange mixture of nervousness and excitement. The ride gave them time to talk more freely than they had in town. Daniel told her about the cattle drive being organized, how Carmichael was one of the largest ranchers in the territory and had a reputation for treating his workers fairly. Clara shared memories of growing up on her family's ranch, the good years before her mother got sick. "You miss it?" Daniel asked as they followed a winding trail through rolling grassland. "I miss what it was," Clara said, "but what it became those last few months, no." That place held nothing but sadness. The Carmichael Ranch sprawled across a beautiful valley with mountains rising in the distance. Cattle dotted the landscape, and Clara counted at least 3 large barns and several outbuildings besides the main house. It was an impressive operation, far larger than her family's spread had ever been. David Carmichael came out to meet them as they rode up. He was a man in his early 40s, tall and weathered, with sandy hair and blue eyes that crinkled at the corners. 2 young girls peeked out from behind him, one about 8 years old and the other maybe 10. "You must be Miss Sutherland," Carmichael said, helping her dismount. "Daniel here spoke highly of you." "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me, Mr. Carmichael," Clara said, suddenly nervous under his appraising gaze. "Call me David. We're not formal out here," he gestured to the girls. "These are my daughters, Emma and Sarah. Girls, say hello." The younger girl, Emma, stayed half hidden, but Sarah stepped forward with more confidence. "Hello, Miss Sutherland. Are you going to be our new housekeeper, if your father thinks I'm suitable?" Clara said, smiling at the girl. David invited them inside the house, which was spacious but showed clear signs of neglect. Dust covered most surfaces, dishes were piled in the kitchen, and laundry overflowed from baskets. Clara understood immediately why he needed help. "I've tried to keep up with it," David admitted, looking embarrassed. "But running the ranch takes all my time, and the girls, bless them, they try, but they're still young. I hired a woman from town 6 months ago, but she couldn't handle the isolation and left after 3 weeks. "I grew up on a ranch," Clara assured him. "Isolation doesn't bother me, and I'm used to hard work." They discussed terms, room and board plus $30 a month, which was more than generous. Clara would handle all household duties, cooking, cleaning, laundry, and helping look after the girls. In return, she'd have a comfortable room in the house and be treated as part of the family, not a servant. "When can you start?" David asked. Clara glanced at Daniel, who nodded encouragingly. "I can start tomorrow if that suits you." "Tomorrow's perfect. Daniel, you'll bring her back out." "Yes, sir," Daniel confirmed. On the ride back to Bozeman, Clara felt lighter than she had in months. She had a job, a purpose, a place to be. It wasn't the life she'd imagined for herself, but it was honest and safe, and right now that felt like more than enough. "Thank you," she told Daniel as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. "You've given me a second chance at life." "You did that yourself," Daniel said. "I just opened a door. You're the one choosing to walk through it. Will I see you again?" Clara asked, surprised by how much the answer mattered to her. "I'll be around." Carmichael's ranch is one of my regular stops, and I'll be helping prep for the cattle drive. We'll cross paths." Something in his tone made Clara think he wanted that as much as she did, though neither of them said it aloud. There was something growing between them, tentative and unnamed, but real nonetheless. The next morning, Daniel brought a wagon to the boarding house to help transport Clara's meager belongings, which now included some clothes Mrs. Henderson had insisted on giving her. The kind landlady hugged Clara goodbye and made her promise to visit town occasionally. The ride to Carmichael's ranch felt different this time. Clara paid attention to landmarks, memorizing the route. This was her new home, and she wanted to know the land. Daniel pointed out various features as they traveled, showing her shortcuts and telling her which areas to avoid during spring flooding. When they arrived, David's daughters came running out to greet them. Emma, the younger one, seemed to have overcome her shyness and chattered excitedly about showing Clara the barn kittens. Sarah, more reserved, helped carry Clara's things inside to her new room. The room was small but comfortable, with a real bed, a dresser, and a window overlooking the mountains. Clara had stayed in worse places, and this felt like luxury compared to the uncertainty of a few days ago. David showed her around the property, introducing her to the ranch hands who lived in the bunkhouse. Most were decent men, though a few gave her looks that made her uncomfortable, until David made it crystal clear that Clara was under his protection, and any disrespect toward her would result in immediate dismissal. Daniel stayed for dinner that evening, and Clara noticed how comfortable he was with David and the girls. He made Emma laugh with stories about a troublesome horse he'd once tried to break, and he listened attentively to Sarah's excited description of a bird's nest she'd been watching. After dinner, while Clara cleaned up the kitchen, she watched through the window as Daniel and David stood by the corral, talking seriously about something. The cattle drive, probably, or ranch business. Daniel looked at home here in a way she hadn't seen in town. This was his element, wide open spaces and honest work. Before he left, Daniel found Clara alone in the kitchen. "You all settled in?" he asked. "Yes, thank you for everything, Daniel, truly." He shifted his weight, suddenly seeming uncomfortable. "Clara, I want you to know if you ever need anything or if there's any trouble you send word. I'll come." "I will," she promised. He looked like he wanted to say something else, but instead just nodded, put on his hat, and headed for his horse. Clara watched him ride away until the darkness swallowed him, feeling an unexpected ache in her chest. The weeks that followed fell into a comfortable rhythm. Clara threw herself into her work, bringing order to the chaotic household. She cleaned every room thoroughly, organized the kitchen, caught up on mountains of laundry, and began cooking proper meals that had the ranch hands complimenting David on his good fortune in finding such a capable housekeeper. The girls warmed to her quickly. Emma followed Clara around like a puppy, constantly chattering and asking questions. Sarah was more cautious but slowly opened up, especially when Clara taught her some of the recipes Clara's mother had taught her. One evening, about 3 weeks after Clara's arrival, Sarah asked quietly, "Did you know our mother?" "No, sweetie," Clara said gently. "I didn't have that honor." "She died when Emma was just 4, Sarah said. "I remember her, but Emma doesn't really. Papa gets sad sometimes, especially at night. I hear him in his study and I know he's missing her." Clara's heart ached for this family, broken by loss just as hers had been. "Your father loves you both very much. That's clear." "He does," Sarah agreed, "but I think he's lonely." "And I think maybe you are too." The girl's perceptiveness startled Clara. "What makes you say that?" "I see how you look at the mountain sometimes, like you're remembering something sad, and how you jump whenever a stranger rides up, like you're afraid of something." Clara realized she'd been more transparent than she'd thought. "I am healing from some hard times," she admitted, "but being here with you and Emma and your father, it's helping." Sarah smiled, a wise smile for such a young girl. "Good, I like having you here. It feels like having a family again." Clara hugged her, blinking back tears. "I like being here too." Daniel visited the ranch every few days, always with some legitimate reason related to the upcoming cattle drive. Supplies to deliver, messages from David's ranch hands in town, updates on the route they'd be taking. But Clara noticed he always found time to talk with her, even if just for a few minutes. They developed an easy friendship, sharing stories about their pasts, their hopes for the future. Daniel talked about maybe settling down someday, finding a piece of land of his own. Clara confessed that she'd always dreamed of having children, a real family, though that seemed unlikely now given her circumstances. "Why unlikely?" Daniel asked. They were sitting on the porch one evening after dinner, watching the sunset paint the mountains purple. "What man would want me?" Clara said, "I have no family, no dowry, nothing to bring to a marriage." "Any man with sense would count himself lucky to have you," Daniel said firmly. "You're intelligent, hardworking kind. Those qualities matter more than money or family connections." Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks. "That's generous of you to say. It's the truth." He paused, then added quietly, "I mean it, Clara. Don't sell yourself short." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, an acknowledgement of feelings neither was quite ready to voice. The moment stretched, full of possibility, until Emma's voice called from inside asking Clara to help her with something. "I should go," Clara said, standing. "Yeah," Daniel agreed, but his eyes followed her as she went inside. The following weeks, as summer deepened into August and the cattle drive preparations intensified, Clara noticed Daniel finding more reasons to visit. He started staying for dinner most nights, helping Emma with her arithmetic, discussing literature with Sarah, who loved to read, and spending long evenings talking with David about ranching and life in general. But it was the moments alone with Clara that seemed to matter most to him. He taught her to handle a rifle properly, insisting she should know how to protect herself and the girls if necessary. He brought her books from town, having noticed she read whenever she had spare time. He fixed things around the house that needed repair, refusing David's offers of payment. Clara found herself watching for him each day, her heart lifting when she spotted his horse approaching. She began taking extra care with her appearance, wearing the nicer dresses Mrs. Henderson had given her, arranging her hair more carefully. She told herself it didn't mean anything, but she knew she was lying. One afternoon in early September, about 6 weeks after Clara had arrived at the ranch, she was hanging laundry when she heard horses approaching. Looking up, she felt her blood run cold. Her father sat astride an old mule, looking even more haggard than the last time she'd seen him. Clara's hands froze on the wet sheet she'd been about to pin. Walter Sutherland dismounted slowly, moving like a much older man. Up close, Clara could see the toll the past weeks had taken on him. He'd lost weight, his clothes hung loose, and his eyes were hollow. "Clara," he said, his voice cracking, "I've been looking for you." "How did you find me?" Clara asked, proud that her voice stayed steady despite the emotions churning inside her. "Asked around town. Someone mentioned seeing you ride out this way with Daniel Ramsey." He took a hesitant step closer. "I needed to see you, to apologize." "Apologize?" Clara heard the bitterness in her own voice. "You tried to trade me like I was a horse or a sack of grain. What apology could possibly cover that?" "None," her father admitted. "There's no excuse for what I did. The drinking, the gambling, none of it justifies how I treated you. You deserved better, and your mother would be ashamed of me." Tears welled in Clara's eyes. Yes, she would be. Walter flinched but didn't argue. "I came to tell you that I've signed the ranch over to the bank. Everything's gone now. I'll be leaving Montana, heading east to stay with your mother's sister in Missouri. Aunt Helen's agreed to take me in, help me get sober and find work." "Good," Clara said, meaning it. "That's good, Papa." "You need help." "I know." He paused, clearly struggling with his emotions. "I also came to tell you that I'm proud of you. You've landed on your feet here from what I hear. You're building a new life without me, and that's exactly what you should do." "I won't forgive you," Clara said quietly. "Not yet, maybe not ever. What you did hurt too deeply." "I understand. I don't deserve forgiveness." Walter reached into his pocket and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "This was your mother's. I want you to have it." Clara unwrapped the cloth to find her mother's locket, a simple silver piece with a tiny photograph inside. She'd thought it lost, probably sold to pay her father's debts. Seeing it now brought a flood of memories. "Thank you," she whispered. "Goodbye, Clara. I hope you find happiness." "You deserve it more than anyone I know." Walter mounted his mule and rode away without looking back. Clara stood there for a long time, clutching the locket and watching her father disappear down the road. She felt David's presence before he spoke. "You all right?" the rancher asked gently. "I don't know," Clara admitted. "That was my father. He came to apologize and say goodbye. Took courage for him to do that. Maybe doesn't change what he did." "No," David agreed. "But it might be a start toward him changing himself. That's all any of us can do, really. Try to be better than we were yesterday." Clara looked at him, this man who'd given her a chance when she had nothing. "Thank you, David, for giving me a home here." "You've earned your place 10 times over," he said. "This ranch runs smoother than it has in years, and my daughters are happier than I've seen them since their mother passed. I'm the one who should be thanking you." That evening, when Daniel arrived for dinner, Clara told him about her father's visit. They sat on the porch again, their usual evening spot when weather permitted. "How do you feel?" Daniel asked, sad, angry, relieved, all of it at once. Clara turned the locket over in her hands. "He's going to Missouri to live with my aunt. Maybe that's what he needs, a fresh start away from all the memories here." "Maybe," Daniel said. "And maybe seeing you doing well, building a good life, that'll help motivate him to fix his own." "When did you get so wise?" Clara asked, managing a small smile. "Hard living teaches hard lessons," Daniel said. "I've made plenty of mistakes in my life. Spent a long time being angry and bitter. Only started to heal when I stopped running from my past and faced it head on." "Is that why you stay on the move? To keep running?" Daniel was quiet for a moment. "It was. But lately, I've been thinking maybe it's time to stop running. Maybe it's time to put down roots somewhere." "Where would you go?" Clara asked, her heart beating faster. "Don't know yet," Daniel said, but his eyes met hers with an intensity that made his meaning clear. "Depends on a few things." Clara wanted to ask what things, wanted to push the conversation into territory they'd been dancing around for weeks, but Emma interrupted, asking Clara to help her get ready for bed. The next few days passed in a blur of activity as the cattle drive preparations reached their final stages. David hired additional hands, and the ranch became a hub of organized chaos. Clara cooked for what felt like an army, keeping the workers fed while managing the household and caring for the girls. Daniel was there from dawn until late at night, working alongside the other men. Clara watched him handle cattle with easy competence, saw the respect the other cowboys showed him, noticed how he never asked anyone to do something he wouldn't do himself. He was a natural leader, and Clara found herself increasingly drawn to him. One evening, she brought coffee and sandwiches out to the men in the corral. Daniel took a break to join her by the fence. "You look exhausted," she said, noting the dark circles under his eyes. "It's honest tired," he said. The good kind. We'll be ready to move the herd out in 3 days. How long will the drive take? About 2 weeks there and back, depending on weather and how cooperative the cattle decide to be. 2 weeks without seeing him. The thought made Clara's chest tighten. When had she become so dependent on his presence? Be safe, she said quietly. Always am, he replied, but there was something in his voice, a weight of unspoken words. Daniel, Clara started, then stopped, unsure how to continue. Yeah, he turned to face her fully, giving her his complete attention. I'm going to miss you, she said, the admission feeling both inadequate and too revealing at the same time. I'm going to miss you too, Clara, more than I probably should. What does that mean? Daniel removed his hat, running his hand through his dark hair. It means that I've gotten attached to being around here, around you. And I know I shouldn't, know I've got no right to feel this way, but I can't seem to help it. Clara's breath caught. Feel what way? Like maybe I've found something worth staying for, someone worth staying for. The world seemed to narrow down to just the two of them, standing in the fading light while the ranch bustled around them. Clara's heart pounded so hard she was sure he could hear it. I feel the same way, she whispered. I've been afraid to say it, afraid it was just me, afraid of getting hurt again. Daniel reached out and gently took her hand. I would never hurt you, Clara. I'd sooner cut off my own arm. I know, she said, and she did know. Daniel Ramsey was the most honest, honorable man she'd ever met. But what happens when the drive is over? You'll move on to the next job, the next town. What if I didn't? Daniel said. What if I stayed? Why would you stay? Because I'm falling in love with you, he said simply. Actually, I think I've been falling since that first night in the saloon, watching you stand strong even when your world was crumbling. You're the bravest person I know, Clara, and the kindest, and I can't imagine moving on and leaving you behind. Tears spilled down Clara's cheeks, but these were happy tears. I love you too. I didn't want to, didn't think I could after everything that happened, but I do. I love you, Daniel. He pulled her closer, his other hand cupping her face tenderly. When I get back from this drive, I want to court you properly. With David's permission, if he'll give it. I want to build a life with you, Clara. A real life with a home and family and everything we've both been missing. Yes, Clara said, laughing through her tears. Yes to all of it. Daniel kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise. Clara melted into him, feeling safe and cherished in a way she'd never experienced before. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling. I better get back to work, Daniel said reluctantly. But we'll talk more tonight after dinner. Really talk about what we both want. Clara nodded, watching him return to the corral. Her heart felt like it might burst from happiness. After everything that had happened, all the pain and uncertainty, she'd found love in the most unexpected place with the most unexpected person. That night, after the girls were in bed and the ranch hands had retired to the bunkhouse, Clara and Daniel sat on the porch for hours talking about their future. Daniel shared his dream of having his own small ranch, nothing as large as David's operation, but enough land for cattle and horses and a family. Clara talked about wanting children, about creating the kind of loving home she'd had before her mother died. I've saved most of my wages over the years, Daniel explained. Got about $4,000 put aside, even after spending that $3,000 on you. It's enough to buy land and stock it, build a small house. It won't be fancy. I don't need fancy, Clara assured him. I need honest and real and full of love, that's all. I can give you that, Daniel promised. I'll spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me. I could never regret it, Clara said. You saved me, Daniel, in every way a person can be saved. You saved me too, he said. Gave me a reason to stop drifting and start living again. They talked until the stars wheeled overhead and the night grew cold. When they finally said goodnight, it was with another kiss and the understanding that their lives had irrevocably changed. They'd found each other against all odds, and they weren't letting go. The next morning, Daniel spoke privately with David, asking permission to court Clara. David gave his blessing immediately, saying he'd seen this coming for weeks and approved wholeheartedly. He even offered to sell Daniel a parcel of land on the edge of his property at a fair price, keeping them close while giving them independence. The morning of the cattle drive departure, Clara woke early to prepare a special breakfast for all the hands. The kitchen was warm and fragrant with baking biscuits and frying bacon. Emma and Sarah helped, excited by all the activity. Daniel came in while Clara was packing supplies for the trail. He pulled her aside away from the others. 2 weeks, he said. Then I'm back and we start planning our future for real. 2 weeks, Clara repeated. I'll be counting the days. He kissed her forehead, then her lips, gentle but full of promise. Keep safe while I'm gone. You too. Come back to me, Daniel Ramsey. Nothing could keep me away. Clara stood with Emma and Sarah, watching the cowboys drive the massive herd of cattle north toward Billings. Daniel rode near the front alongside David, and he turned once to wave at Clara before disappearing in a cloud of dust. The 2 weeks that followed were the longest of Clara's life. She threw herself into work, keeping busy to avoid worrying. She taught Sarah to bake bread and helped Emma with her reading. She organized the entire house, mended every piece of clothing she could find, and started a vegetable garden that had been neglected. News from the drive came via a courier who rode back with messages on day 8. Everything was going well, no major problems, and they expected to reach Billings on schedule. Clara read Daniel's brief note to her dozens of times, treasuring every word. On day 13, Clara was hanging laundry when she heard horses approaching. Her heart leaped, thinking the drive had returned early, but the riders were strangers. 3 rough-looking men dismounted near the house, and Clara immediately felt uneasy. "Afternoon, miss," the leader said, a scarred man with cold eyes. "We're looking for work. Heard Carmichael might be hiring." "The ranch owner is away on a cattle drive," Clara said, keeping her voice steady. "You'll have to come back in a few days." "That's too bad," the man said, moving closer. "Because we need money now, and this looks like a prosperous place." Clara's blood ran cold as she realized these weren't job seekers but thieves. She thought of Emma and Sarah inside the house, and fear spiked through her. "There's nothing here for you," she said firmly. "You should leave." "I don't think so," the man said. "Boys, check the house." Clara ran for the door, but one of the men grabbed her. She screamed, fighting against his grip, and heard Sarah cry out from inside. The rifle Daniel had taught her to use was in the house, useless to her now. Suddenly, gunshots rang out. The man holding Clara released her and went for his weapon, but more shots sounded, and he fell. Clara scrambled away, her heart pounding. The 2 other thieves tried to mount their horses, but riders were already surrounding them, rifles aimed. Clara looked up to see 3 of David's ranch hands, the ones who'd stayed behind to maintain the property. They'd heard her scream and come running. Within minutes, the would-be thieves were either dead or subdued, and Clara was shaking with reaction. "You all right, Miss Clara?" asked Tom, the oldest ranch hand. "Yes, thank you. The girls Sarah and Emma are fine," Tom assured her. "Scared but unhurt. You did good standing up to these men." Clara went inside to comfort the girls, holding them while they cried. She was proud that Sarah had immediately taken Emma and hidden under a bed, just as Clara had taught them to do if there was ever danger. The girls were braver than they knew. When David and the others returned 3 days later, Clara recounted what had happened. David was white-faced with fear at what might have been, and immediately increased security around the ranch. But it was Daniel's reaction that struck Clara most deeply. He pulled her into his arms the moment he heard, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "I wasn't here," he said, his voice rough. "You could have been hurt, and I wasn't here to protect you." "I'm fine," Clara assured him. "We're all fine. Tom and the others handled it." "I need to marry you," Daniel said suddenly. "Soon. I need to know you're mine and I'm yours, that I have the right to protect you always. I can't stand the thought of something happening to you." Clara pulled back to look at him. "Is this a proposal?" "It's a terrible proposal," Daniel admitted. "But yes, Clara Sutherland, will you marry me? I love you more than I thought it was possible to love another person. I want to spend my life with you, build a home with you, raise children with you. Please say yes." "Yes," Clara said, laughing and crying at once. "Yes, Daniel, I'll marry you." He kissed her then, not caring that David and the ranch hands were watching. When they finally broke apart, everyone was cheering. The wedding was planned for 2 weeks later, giving them time to arrange everything properly. David insisted on hosting it at the ranch, and Mrs. Henderson came from town to help Clara prepare. The guest list was small but meaningful. David and his daughters, the ranch hands, Mrs. Henderson, Mr. Chen from the restaurant, and a few other townspeople who'd become friends. Clara wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Henderson helped her sew, and she carried wildflowers that Emma and Sarah picked. Daniel wore his best clothes, which were still work-worn but clean and respectable. The circuit preacher performed the ceremony in David's living room, and Clara had never felt more beautiful or loved than when Daniel slid a simple gold band onto her finger. "I love you, Clara Ramsey," he whispered. "I love you too," she whispered back. The celebration afterward was joyful and genuine. David gave a toast to the couple, thanking Daniel for being a good friend and Clara for bringing light back into his home. Emma and Sarah presented Clara with a handmade drawing of their family, which now included Clara and Daniel. Clara cried happy tears and hugged both girls tightly. As evening fell and the guests began to leave, Daniel and Clara slipped away to the small cabin David had lent them for their wedding night. It was simple but clean, with a fire crackling in the hearth and fresh flowers on the table. "Happy?" Daniel asked, pulling Clara into his arms. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she said. "A few months ago I was being traded to settle a debt. Now I'm married to the man I love with a real future ahead. It doesn't seem real." "It's real," Daniel assured her, "and it's just the beginning. We've got a whole life to build together." They spent their wedding night wrapped in each other's arms, talking and laughing and making love as husband and wife. Clara felt cherished and safe, two things she'd feared she'd never feel again. Over the following months, Daniel and Clara worked on building their life together. David sold them the land he'd promised, 50 acres on the edge of his property with a creek running through it and good grazing land. Daniel and several of the ranch hands built a house, nothing fancy but solid and well-made, with 3 bedrooms, a large kitchen, and a porch that faced the mountains. Clara threw herself into making it a home, sewing curtains and quilts, planting a garden, and creating the warm, loving space she'd always dreamed of. Daniel worked hard, building their cattle herd with carefully selected stock, and hiring 2 hands to help manage the growing operation. They spent their evenings on the porch, talking about their days and planning for the future. Sometimes Emma and Sarah would visit, staying for dinner and treating Clara's house like a second home. Clara loved having them around, and she told Daniel she hoped their own children would have the same kind of close-knit relationships. "Speaking of children," Daniel said one evening about 6 months after their wedding, "any chance we might be expecting one?" Clara smiled, her hand moving to her still flat stomach. "I was going to tell you tonight. I'm about 2 months along, I think." Daniel let out a whoop of joy, lifting Clara and spinning her around. "We're having a baby, Clara, we're having a baby, we are," she laughed, holding on to him. "Are you happy?" "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," he said, setting her down gently and placing his hand over hers on her stomach. "Our child, yours and mine, it's everything I wanted but never thought I'd have." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Clara continued working around the ranch, though Daniel fussed over her constantly, trying to get her to rest more. In May of 1884, after a long labor attended by Mrs. Henderson and the doctor from Bozeman, Clara gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Thomas Daniel Ramsey after Daniel's father. Clara held her son and wept with joy, overwhelmed by the love she felt for this tiny person. Daniel sat beside them on the bed, his arm around Clara, staring at their son with wonder. "We made this," he said quietly. "This perfect little person, we made him together." "He has your eyes," Clara said, noting the baby's dark gaze. "And your stubbornness, I bet," Daniel said with a grin. "Little Tommy was a good baby, healthy and strong." David and the girls visited often, bringing gifts and help. Sarah, now 12, loved holding the baby and helping Clara care for him. Emma, 10 years old, was more interested in playing outside but would sit quietly sometimes and sing to Tommy when he fussed. Life fell into a beautiful rhythm. The ranch prospered under Daniel's management. He proved to have a natural talent for breeding cattle, and other ranchers began seeking his advice and buying his stock. Clara managed their home with the same efficiency she'd brought to David's household, and she never stopped being grateful for the life she'd built. 2 years after Tommy's birth, Clara became pregnant again. This time she gave birth to a daughter they named Mary Grace, after both their mothers. Mary had Clara's brown hair and Daniel's serious expression, and Tommy was fascinated by his baby sister. Their little family was complete, or so Clara thought, until 4 years later when she discovered she was pregnant once more. This surprise baby was another boy, Samuel, who arrived with a head full of black hair and the loudest cry anyone had ever heard. Through it all, Daniel and Clara's love only deepened. They supported each other through hard times, droughts that threatened the cattle, illnesses that swept through the territory, the normal challenges of ranching life. But they also celebrated the good times. Successful calving seasons, the children's milestones, community gatherings where their family was known and respected. One evening when Tommy was 10, Mary was 8, and Samuel was 4, Clara sat on the porch watching Daniel teach the boys to rope a post while Mary practiced her reading nearby. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting everything gold. David rode up on his horse, looking older now but still strong. Emma had married a ranch hand 2 years ago and moved to Wyoming. Sarah, at 22, ran her father's ranch with impressive skill and showed no signs of wanting to marry anytime soon. "Evening, Clara," David said, dismounting. "Family looks good. We've been blessed," Clara agreed. "More than I ever dreamed possible." "You've built something special here," David said. "You and Daniel both. Started with nothing but hope and hard work, and look at what you have now." Clara looked at her family, her home, the land stretching out around them. David was right. They'd built something precious and real. And it all started because one man had been willing to stand up and do the right thing, to give a desperate woman her freedom without asking for anything in return. As if reading her thoughts, Daniel looked up from the roping lesson and caught her eye. He smiled, that slow, genuine smile she'd fallen in love with, and her heart still fluttered just as it had years ago. That night, after the children were in bed and David had gone home, Daniel and Clara lay together in the bedroom they'd shared for over 8 years. "You ever think about that night in the saloon?" Clara asked. When you tore up those papers. Sometimes, Daniel admitted. Best $3,000 I ever spent. Do you ever regret it? Maybe you could have done more with that money if you hadn't wasted it on a stranger. Daniel rolled over to face her, his expression serious. Clara Ramsey, listen to me. That money bought me everything that matters. It bought me you, and through you this whole beautiful life we've built. Our children, our home, our love. I'd spend $3,000 100 times over for what we have. I love you, Clara said, her voice thick with emotion. I love you so much, Daniel. You saved me. We saved each other, he corrected. You gave me a reason to stop running, to put down roots, to build instead of drift. Before you, I was just existing. Now I'm living. They made love tenderly, with the familiarity and passion of a couple who'd grown together, learned each other's rhythms and needs. Afterward, Clara lay in Daniel's arms, listening to his heartbeat and feeling perfectly content. The years continued to pass, bringing changes and challenges, but also deep joy. Tommy grew into a serious young man who loved ranching as much as his father did. Mary proved to have a talent for numbers and began keeping the ranch books when she was just 14. Samuel was the wild one, always getting into scrapes but with a heart as big as Montana itself. When Clara was 42, her Aunt Helen wrote to tell her that Clara's father had died peacefully in Missouri. He'd been sober for the last 5 years of his life and had worked as a clerk in a general store. In his final letter, which Aunt Helen enclosed, Walter apologized again to Clara and expressed his pride in the life she'd built. He hoped she'd forgiven him, but he understood if she hadn't. Clara cried when she read the letter, but they were complicated tears. She'd never fully forgiven her father, but time had softened her anger into sadness for what had been lost. She was grateful he'd found some peace before the end. "Are you all right?" Daniel asked, holding her while she cried. "I am," Clara said. "It's just strange knowing he's gone. He was a terrible father at the end, but he was my father. And maybe, in his own way, trying to get better was his way of making amends." "That's a generous way to see it," Daniel said. "You taught me that," Clara said. "You showed me that people can change, that one moment of kindness can alter the course of a life. My father hurt me terribly, but he also led me to Bozeman that night where I met you. So maybe something good came from the pain after all." As their children grew into adults, Clara and Daniel watched with pride as each found their own path. Tommy took over much of the ranch operations, freeing Daniel to focus on the breeding program that had made their ranch famous throughout Montana. Mary married a schoolteacher and moved to Bozeman, where she opened a successful bookkeeping business. Samuel, the wanderer, spent several years exploring the West before returning home to work the ranch alongside his brother and father. David passed away when Clara was 50, leaving his ranch to Sarah, who never did marry. She and Clara remained close friends, often sharing coffee and conversation about ranching, life, and the choices women made. "You ever regret not marrying?" Clara asked Sarah one afternoon. "No," Sarah said firmly. "I love this ranch and I love the independence of running it myself. Not every woman needs a husband to be complete." "That's true," Clara agreed, "though I'm grateful I found mine." "You and Daniel are special," Sarah said. "Everyone knows your story, how he bought your freedom and then fell in love with you. It's the most romantic thing I've ever heard." Clara smiled, thinking back to that night in the Golden Dust Saloon. She'd been so afraid, so lost, and Daniel had appeared like an answer to a prayer she hadn't known how to pray. When Clara turned 60, Daniel threw her a birthday celebration at the ranch. All their children came along with their families. Tommy and his wife had given Clara and Daniel 4 grandchildren. Mary had 3, and Samuel had just welcomed his first. The house was full of noise and laughter and love, everything Clara had dreamed of during those dark days after her mother died. That evening, after everyone had left and the house was quiet again, Daniel took Clara's hand and led her outside. The stars blazed overhead, and the night air was cool and clean. 60 years old, Daniel said. You're as beautiful now as you were that first night I saw you. You're a flatterer, Clara said, but she was pleased. I mean it. You've aged like fine wine, Clara Ramsey. He pulled her close, and they swayed together to music only they could hear. Thank you for saying yes all those years ago. Thank you for asking, Clara replied. Thank you for seeing me when I needed to be seen, for giving me my freedom, for loving me. Easiest thing I ever did, Daniel said. Loving you has been the great privilege of my life. They stood there under the stars, two people who'd found each other against all odds and built something lasting and true. Clara thought about the journey that had brought her here, from desperation and betrayal to love and family. The path had been hard, but every step had been worth it. As they went back inside, Clara paused at the door to look back at the land they'd built their life on. The house Daniel had constructed with his own hands, the barns where their cattle and horses sheltered, the garden where she'd planted seeds and watched them grow season after season. The mountains standing eternal in the distance. This was home. This was family. This was the life she'd built with the man who'd torn up a piece of paper and given her freedom, never imagining that in doing so, he'd also give her everything else that mattered. Years continued to pass with gentle grace. Clara and Daniel grew old together, their bodies slowing but their love remaining constant. They watched their grandchildren grow and welcomed great-grandchildren into the world. The ranch prospered under Tommy and Samuel's management, and the Ramsey name became synonymous with quality cattle throughout the territory. On a warm summer evening, when Clara was 73 and Daniel was 81, they sat on the porch as they'd done thousands of times before. Daniel's hair was completely white now, his face deeply lined, but his dark eyes still sparkled when he looked at Clara. "I've been thinking," Daniel said, taking Clara's hand, "about that night we met, about all the choices that led us to each other." "I think about it too," Clara admitted. "How differently things could have turned out." "I want you to know something," Daniel said seriously. "If I could go back and live my life over, I wouldn't change a single thing. Every hardship, every loss, every mistake, they all led me to that saloon on that specific night when you needed someone to stand up for you. And standing up for you led to everything else that's made my life worth living." Clara felt tears on her cheeks. "I feel the same way. Even the worst moments, the pain with my father, all of it brought me to you. And you, Daniel Ramsey, you've given me a life beyond my wildest dreams." Daniel leaned over and kissed her, soft and sweet, a kiss that held 50 years of love and commitment and partnership. "I love you, Clara. Today, tomorrow, and forever." "Forever," Clara agreed. "That's how long I'll love you too." As the sun set behind the mountains and the stars began to emerge, Clara and Daniel sat together in peaceful contentment. They'd taken the broken pieces of their pasts and forged them into something beautiful and whole. They'd raised a family, built a legacy, and most importantly, they'd loved each other through every season of life. The story that had begun with a gambling debt and a torn piece of paper had become a love story for the ages. Proof that sometimes the most broken moments can lead to the most beautiful beginnings. And as Clara looked at her husband, her partner, her love, she knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Tommy took over the ranch completely when Daniel was 85 and finally ready to step back from daily operations. Daniel and Clara remained in their home, surrounded by family and memories. Their children visited regularly, and there was always a grandchild or great-grandchild stopping by to hear stories about the old days. Clara took particular joy in telling the young women in the family about how she and Daniel had met, always emphasizing that sometimes life's worst moments could become unexpected blessings. She wanted them to know that strength could be found even in desperate circumstances, and that true love existed between partners who respected and supported each other. On a crisp autumn morning when Clara was 78, she woke to find Daniel still asleep beside her, his breathing peaceful and even. She lay there watching him, cataloging the familiar features she'd loved for so many years. His strong jaw, now softened by age. The scar on his cheek that she'd traced with her fingers countless times. The silver hair that still showed hints of the deep black it had once been. As if sensing her gaze, Daniel's eyes opened. He smiled at her, that same smile that had captured her heart decades ago. "Morning, beautiful," he said, his voice rough with sleep. "Morning, handsome," she replied. They rose slowly, helping each other dress as they'd learned to do as their bodies aged. Daniel made coffee while Clara started breakfast, the domestic routine comfortable and familiar. They ate on the porch, watching the ranch come to life around them. "You know what today is?" Daniel asked. Clara thought for a moment, then smiled. 54 years since you tore up those papers. 54 years since I made the best decision of my life, Daniel corrected. They spent the day quietly, receiving visits from their children and grandchildren who'd remembered the anniversary. Mary brought a cake she'd baked. Tommy and Samuel brought flowers from their wives' gardens. The great-grandchildren ran around the yard, their laughter filling the air. As evening approached and the family began to leave, Clara felt overwhelmingly grateful for the life she'd lived. She'd started with nothing, less than nothing, and had been given everything that truly mattered. That night, lying in bed with Daniel's arms around her, Clara said, "I want you to know that if I had to live my life over, I wouldn't change anything either. Not the pain, not the fear, nothing. Because it all led me to you, and you gave me a life more wonderful than I ever imagined possible." "We gave each other that life," Daniel said. "We built it together day by day, year by year." "Yes," Clara agreed. "Together. That's the best word to describe us, together." They fell asleep that way, wrapped in each other's arms, two souls who'd found each other in the darkness and built a life filled with light. The seasons continued their eternal cycle. Clara and Daniel celebrated their 55th wedding anniversary, then their 56th. Their love story became legend in the area, passed down through families as an example of what true devotion looked like. When Clara was 82, she fell ill with pneumonia. The doctor came and did what he could, but Clara's body was tired, worn down by decades of hard work and long life. She lay in their bed, Daniel at her side holding her hand. Their children and grandchildren gathered, filling the house with love even as grief hovered at the edges. Clara looked at each face, storing up memories to take with her wherever she was going. "Don't be sad," she told them, her voice weak but clear. "I've had a beautiful life, more than I deserved, more than I dreamed possible." But it was Daniel she kept coming back to, Daniel whose hand she held, Daniel whose face she watched. "Thank you," she whispered to him, "for everything. For saving me, for loving me, for building this life with me." "Thank you for saying yes," Daniel replied, tears streaming down his weathered face. "Thank you for letting me love you. You've been the joy of my life, Clara." "We'll find each other again," Clara said. "Somehow, somewhere. This kind of love doesn't end." "No," Daniel agreed. "It doesn't end. I'll carry it with me until I can be with you again." Clara closed her eyes, her breathing shallow. "Tell me the story," she whispered. "Tell me how we met." Through his tears, Daniel began the story they both knew by heart. The sound of poker chips filled the smoky air of the Golden Dust Saloon, and I saw the most beautiful, brave woman I'd ever seen standing in the doorway, facing down her worst fear with her head held high. Clara smiled, listening to her husband's voice recount their beginning. As he spoke, she felt herself drifting, peaceful and ready. She'd lived fully, loved deeply, and left a legacy of family and love that would endure long after she was gone. Her last conscious thought was how grateful she was that Daniel Ramsey had walked into that saloon on that specific night. How one man's act of kindness had become the foundation of a lifetime of love. She passed quietly, her hand in Daniel's, surrounded by the family they'd created together. Daniel lived another 2 years after Clara's death, though everyone said part of him had gone with her. He spent his days on the porch of their home, often talking to Clara as if she were still beside him. His children worried but understood. When you'd loved someone as completely as Daniel had loved Clara, her absence left a wound that couldn't fully heal. On a summer evening very much like the one when they'd first said they loved each other, Daniel sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold. Tommy was running the ranch. Samuel was teaching his own son about cattle. Mary had visited that afternoon with fresh bread and news of the grandchildren. Life continued as it always did. Daniel felt Clara's presence strongly that evening, almost as if she were sitting beside him. He smiled, thinking about their first kiss, their wedding day, the births of their children, the thousands of quiet moments that had made up their life together. "I'm ready," he said aloud to the empty air. "If you're waiting for me, Clara, I'm ready to come home." That night, Daniel Ramsey died peacefully in his sleep. His children found him in the morning, a slight smile on his face, as if he'd seen something wonderful. They buried him beside Clara in the small cemetery on their land, under a tree they'd planted together 40 years earlier. The headstone reads simply, "Daniel and Clara Ramsey, together forever." The ranch continued under Tommy's management, then his sons, passing down through generations. The house Daniel built remained standing, carefully maintained by family members who knew the importance of preserving the place where such a great love story had unfolded. Years became decades. The 20th century arrived, bringing automobiles and electricity and changes that would have seemed impossible to Daniel and Clara. But in Bozeman and the surrounding ranches, people still told the story of the cowboy who'd bought a woman's freedom and then won her heart. It became the standard by which other love stories were measured. Parents told it to their daughters to show them what a good man looked like. They told it to their sons to teach them about honor and integrity. The tale of how Daniel Ramsey had torn up a piece of paper in the Golden Dust Saloon, and in doing so, had created one of the most enduring love stories of the American West. The Golden Dust Saloon eventually closed, replaced by more modern establishments, but a plaque was placed on the building marking it as the site where Daniel and Clara's story had begun. Historians researched their lives, documenting the ranch they'd built, the cattle dynasty they'd started, the family they'd raised. But at its heart, it remained a simple story about two broken people who'd found each other and, through love and hard work and commitment, had built something lasting and true. It was a story about second chances, about how a single act of kindness could ripple forward through generations. In the cemetery where they lay side by side, wildflowers grew every spring, and their descendants still came to visit, bringing their own children to tell them about their great-great-grandparents who'd loved each other so completely that their story became legend. The Wild West that Daniel and Clara had known eventually faded into history. The open ranges were fenced, the small towns grew into cities, and the hard frontier life they'd lived became stories told around dinner tables. But the ranch they'd built remained, a testament to what two people could create when they chose love over despair, partnership over loneliness, and hope over fear. And in that way, Daniel and Clara Ramsey lived on, not just in the descendants who carried their blood, but in the story itself. A reminder that even in the darkest moments when everything seems lost, love can find a way. All it takes is one person willing to stand up and do what's right, to tear up the papers that bind us to our worst circumstances, and to offer the most precious gift anyone can give: freedom, respect, and the space to become who we were always meant to be. That night in the Golden Dust Saloon in Bozeman, Montana Territory, in August of 1883, had been the beginning of everything. One gambling debt, one act of kindness, one torn piece of paper. From those simple elements, an entire world had been built, a legacy created, and a love story written that would endure as long as people remembered the Wild West and the brave souls who'd carved lives from its harsh beauty. Daniel and Clara's story proved that happy endings weren't just the stuff of fairy tales. They were real and possible, waiting for anyone brave enough to reach for them. All it took was courage, kindness, and the willingness to believe that even when life brought you to your knees, love could lift you up again. And so their story ended, not with sadness but with celebration. Two lives fully lived, two hearts completely given, two souls joined so thoroughly that even death couldn't truly separate them. They'd found each other in the darkness and created light. They'd started with nothing and built everything. They'd taken broken pieces and made something whole and beautiful. That was the legacy of Daniel and Clara Ramsey. Proof that love could conquer anything, that kindness mattered, that second chances existed, and that sometimes the best things in life came from the most unexpected moments. Their great-great-grandchildren still lived on the ranch, still raised cattle using the breeding principles Daniel had established, still told the story of how it all began. And on quiet evenings, when the sun set behind the mountains and painted the sky in shades of gold and purple, if you listened carefully, you could almost hear two voices on the old porch, talking and laughing as they'd done for 54 years, together forever in the place they'd made their own. The end.